Oh, winter is coming. And it should be just about here in the Northland. Well, at least winter like conditions. Typically by late October, we should start to see some of the first snowfalls. And yes, that will accumulate a little bit more as we get farther along. And eventually, we get to meteorological winter. That, of course, being December, January, and February. It was about 2 weeks ago when the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center released their outlook for what we could be seeing across the United States when it comes to temperature and precipitation outlook. So I wanted to take a little bit of time here to talk a little bit more about what this means in the Northland, break it down just a little bit more, and what I think may or may not happen. So let's start with what the Climate Prediction Center put out about 2 weeks ago here. Let's start with the temperature forecast. And again, this is their trending for what they think the overall 3 month period of December, January, and February will look like. And for a good chunk of the northern US, the odds are looking favorable for below normal temperatures. Now, again, this is the average over the 3 months here. This isn't going to say that all 3 months are going to be below average. But if we did have to take all the temperatures, average them all out, and compare them to the 30-year average, right now, the long term model runs are sort of favoring below average temperatures. Now, here in the Northland, we're used to freezing temperatures throughout these 3 months. So maybe just a little bit colder, or at least favoring that. Looking ahead to precipitation, and well, this is good news, especially given that the Northland has been dealing with drought conditions. The model runs may be trending towards a little more precipitation compared to the 30-year average, a little bit more dry in the southern U.S. But again, this is across all 3 months and sort of averaging itself out here. But still, when you're in drought, if you got a forecast that's looking a little bit more favorable for wet conditions, you pay a little more attention to it. Now, again, these two model runs, the temperature outlook and the precipitation forecast, they sort of favor what is known as the La Nina oscillation out in the Pacific Ocean. So let's break that down a little bit more here. During the winter months, the trade winds, which blow across the equator from east to west, will typically take the warm waters that form in the eastern Pacific Ocean during the summer months and move them towards the western Pacific. So, when you compare temperatures along the equator between the areas of Asia and South America, the warmest temperatures should be over towards the Asia Australia side of the Pacific Ocean, the Western Pacific. And it should be a couple degrees Celsius. In La Nina years, those trade winds are a little bit stronger than average, which means that, relatively speaking, when you compare things to average, it is cooler than average next to South America and Central America, and a little bit warmer next to Asia and Australia. And this is one of the great oscillations where we know that there typically is a trend when it comes to the overall weather patterns during the winter months. Basically, the Pacific jet that you see up here sort of gets a little bit farther north. During an El Nino year, you'll see that jet coming down to the south, cutting across Southern California, making their way across the Rockies. Well, that's not the case this year. This year, if we do have a La Nina, that jet's a little bit farther north, sort of combines with the polar jet and sort of cuts across the northern parts of the United States. Thus, you get the drier and warmer trend in the southern U.S., a little bit more wet conditions elsewhere, but here in the Northland, maybe could get just a little bit cooler. Now, I do want to specify one thing here. This is a weak La Nina trend. We've had a couple La Ninas recently where things have been a little bit stronger, where that oscillation, that warmer water in the Western Pacific, is a little bit higher than average. And that has led to some of the greater swings with a La Nina winter trend. But this is looking to be a little bit more of a weak La Nina, which has me thinking that maybe we need to be more concerned about some of the other oscillations. For example, there is the East Pacific Oscillation. Where does the high pressure system that will typically form in the northern Pacific sort of take its shape here? It all depends on how strong those highs and lows are. So if we have a positive mode here, the high is a little bit farther south, sort of like straight west of the west coast of the continental United States. Thus, the jet stream sort of is zonal, what we call usually a west to east flow across the region. If, however, it gets into a negative mode and that high sort of sets itself up near the Aleutian Islands and Alaska, then the jet stream gets a little bit more of that dips with the troughs and the ridges, and that could lead to some colder temperatures, a little bit more of those polar vortex moments across the region here. May also keep things a little bit drier. As you know, storm systems like to ride the jet stream, and if that jet stream isn't over, the Western Great Lakes, well, you're not going to get a whole lot of big events when it comes to precipitation. Another oscillation that we're going to be keeping an eye on is known as the North Atlantic. And just like in the Pacific, a high pressure system will set itself up at some point across the Atlantic. Now, in a positive mode, the high is strongest basically due east of the eastern seaboard of the United States, and thus you get that zonal jet stream across the region. If, however, that strong high sets itself up a little bit farther north or is a little bit weaker to keep that jet stream from staying zonal, well, you can have those dips, you can have those ebbs and flows and ridges, and thus you can get some decent snowstorms and, yes, those colder streaks in the winter months. So, again, just different oscillations that we're going to be keeping our eyes out and helping us to guide where we think some of those storm systems are going to be taking place. So let's talk about the Northland specifically, and I want to thank the National Weather Service office in Duluth for helping out with a little bit more of this information. So let's talk about temperatures. So again, the trend with all the long-term model runs, the oscillations, and whatever else, that is trending to be favoring below average temperatures. So here in Duluth, the average highs will be in the 20s, average lows in the single digits. So when we get the 3 months figured out here, maybe we're a degree or two below that average in both the highs and the lows. Now, when we talk about trending below average, this does not mean that every day is going to be below average. No, there are going to be days when there are going to have those polar vortexes happening, and yes, you're going to have those chillier stretches. And you're going to have a few stretches where things are going to be a little bit warmer, that January thaw or February thaw. What we basically want to figure out is what's the overall trend? Are we looking at something that might be favoring more snow if it stays cold enough, or maybe more mixed precipitation if temperatures actually stay above average and closer to the freezing point or even above freezing? Speaking of that precipitation threat, again, the trend for December, January, and February is to be slightly above average for precipitation totals. So if we are going to be seeing the temperatures trending at or slightly below average over the next 3 months, December, January, and February, maybe we are going to see some of those snow storms come on through. One fact that the National Weather Service office in Duluth help us to understand is that when it's a weak La Nina system that is playing out in the Pacific Ocean, the snowfall averages are kind of out there. This is the range for the 3 months. There have been as low as 30 inches in December, January, and February with weak La Ninas, and there have been 87 inches falling in those 3 months. So, yes, it's a bit of a wide range. Here in Duluth and across the Northland, all depending on where you live, it's about 45 to 65-inch average for these months. So we could see a little bit of this and that. The big play is going to be whether or not those temperatures stay below average and whether or not we get those precipitation totals here. Now, I was asked recently, okay, what do you got for a snowfall total? I don't really like playing that game here. I mean, yes, I can try, but I like to take a look at that 30-year average. So you know what? Here is what I'm going to say when it comes to the winter months here in the Northland. We will see our typical winter weather conditions. Yes, we are going to have those Alberta Clipper systems. And yes, there are probably going to be a few of those big snowstorms coming out of those Colorado lows that work their way northeast towards the Great Lakes. And of course, if we're on the right side of that, we can get the lake effect snows, we can get the lake enhancements. That's the heavy snowfalls of 6 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches plus. And we're going to have probably a couple really chillier days. You know, those days where maybe some of us don't get above zero for highs, where we have those wind chills 30 below or even colder that causes schools and businesses to shut down for the day or close early. Look, winter weather is going to happen in the Northland. So my promise to you is this. When I am in this weather center here and I'm doing my best to try to figure out the forecast, I'm going to focus on the next 7 days. I feel like I've gotten pretty good at following the model runs, following all the different charts and jet streams and whatever else here to get a pretty good sense that when there is a decent snow event or storm with ice and sleet or those colder snaps or those thaws of above freezing temperatures, I want to make sure that I give you enough warning for it. Look, whether you are just starting to live here in the Northland or you've lived here all your life, and that goes back decades, you know that winter weather is going to be a big part of our lives here. And my goal is very simple: give you enough warning, give you enough information so that you can make the best decision for yourself and those who you care for and who you know and who you talk to here, so that we can get through this winter season with minimal disruptions and preparations necessary to ensure that you can enjoy this wonderful season here in the Northland. All right, the good news is the day that you're watching this, we're not expecting any big snow events as we go into November here. So we just got to wait a little bit longer for that first big snowfall of the year. I'll let you know when it's coming. Thanks for watching.